This is Rudkowski of WeAreChange.org here in New York City, and I have the distinct pleasure to be joined by J. Michael Springmann, an incredible individual with an incredible story that you will not hear anywhere in the mainstream media because they don't want you knowing the fact that our government pretty much sponsors terrorism.
I was in Jeddah between 1987 and 1989. When I was there, it was about the middle of the recruiting process for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And people would come to me with no ties to either Saudi Arabia or to their own country. For example, there was a couple of Pakistani fellows who were going to a Commerce Department trade mission in the United States on auto parts. They couldn't name the trade show, and they couldn't name the city in which it was being held. The CIA case officer in the commercial section, Paul Arvid Tveit, Tveit, who's now retired, living in Virginia, he immediately called me up and said, "We want visas for these guys." And I said, "I'm sorry, the law and regulations say they have to convince me they're coming back, and somebody who's going to the States on a trade mission doesn't know where he's going or why he's going, he's not going to get a visa." And Tveit went to the head of the consular section, Justice given name Stevens, and got the visas reversed. This went on through most of my time in Saudi Arabia. They were people that were not businessmen. They weren't people who were doctors, lawyers, or Indian chiefs. These were clerks. They were, one cut above maybe a gas station attendant. And every time I would refuse some of these characters, the Consul General J. Freres, who I believe did not work for the Department of State, insisted that if I wanted to keep my career in the State Department, I was going to issue the visa.
Wow.
I had kept a file of these things, written on it, overruled by Consul General J.P. Freres. I would do it in red ink and kept it in the file in my office. After I left Jeddah, I failed to take the file with me or make copies, and I found out it was shredded by person or persons unknown. And once I was out of the State Department, I found out from the journalist Joe Trento in Washington, D.C., that these guys were recruits for the Mujahideen. They were being brought to the United States for training, for rewards, for instruction, for debriefing, or whatever. Wow.
So this directly connects to Mujahideen with pretty much Central Intelligence Agency.
Oh, yeah.
In what year are we talking about?
This was 1987 to 1989, but they were recruits beforehand and afterwards. And I was told by one contact that one of the reasons that Osama bin Laden ended up on the outs with the Americans was that he continued to recruit the Mujahideen. It was later, in around 2000, 2001, Shana Steinger, who had my position in the consular section, she issued visas to 11 of the 15 Saudi hijackers. 4 of them got visas elsewhere, maybe Riyadh or in Dhahran in the eastern province, I'm not sure. And the rest got visas outside of the country. Basically, these were the guys that they wanted to send to fight the Soviet Union and shoot things down and blow things up, hopefully with Soviet soldiers inside.
Yep. What was one of the biggest revelations for yourself working at the State Department, going through all the processes, going through all the higher levels telling you what to do?
Well, the biggest revelation was how deeply involved the intelligence services were with the Department of State. I mentioned earlier today, and I mentioned in my book, Visas for Al-Qaeda, CIA handouts that rock the world, that a former station chief told me that roughly a third of the people who work as diplomats for the American government don't. They work for the spooks. This was echoed by a real State Department officer, Jay Hawley. I've had a former ambassador say that it's roughly half of the people in a given foreign service post work for the intelligence services. Wow. When I was in Jeddah, nearly everyone there worked for either the CIA or the NSA. I mean, there were, out of some 20 Americans, myself, Mike Springmann, Lonnie Washington, the only State Department communicator, and Jim Page, one of the 2 administrative officers, we were the only people that I knew for certainty to have no ties with any of the intelligence services. There's a Canadian publication, what is it called? Spooks in the Foreign Service. I've not seen it, but I've read about it. They say that roughly 2/3 of the people who work for the State Department work for the intelligence services.
Wow. With everything happening right now in the Middle East with ISIS and so much information coming out with them being trained and backed and so much money and even our weapons being used by them, what is kind of your thoughts about the whole situation from learning everything at the State Department?
Well, it's just a continuation of what went on in Jeddah. They recruited the Mujahideen. Then they decided somewhere along the way in Afghanistan that, hey, we've got a cadre of people we can use to destabilize and overthrow governments. Let's send them to Yugoslavia. It's a socialist country. It's a block to American control of oil and natural gas routes in Central Asia. Let's see what we can do about that country. And by God, they did. Osama bin Laden was there with thousands of Saudis and others. They were trained by NATO. They were given intelligence by NATO. The American government quite clearly wanted to get rid of the Yugoslav government and break it up into small, ineffective statelets. This continued. They had a brand change. It was called not the Mujahideen anymore. It was Al-Qaeda. And these were the guys that went to Iraq. And as the professor Edmund Gharib in Washington, D.C. has said, there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq till the American invasion. These guys then were brought to Libya to overthrow the Gaddafi, the director of the country. And when that was done, the so-called rebels, the freedom fighters, had more weapons in their army than the British army did in theirs. They moved the people and the weapons to Syria, where they've been fighting for 4 years, trying to get rid of Assad because he's not liked by the American government or by the Israeli government or by the French or the British governments, for that matter. And it's basically a name change. It's the same group of fanatical Muslims that they've recruited from all over the world and sent to fight. The Cheryl Bernard, the wife of Zalmay Khalilzad, the Afghan American who was ambassador to Afghanistan, to Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and the United Nations, she said the only way we could get the Soviets out of Afghanistan is to find the craziest, wildest, most ferocious people we can and turn them loose. And they did. And they kept it going. And it's a brand change. They're currently calling it ISIL. And who knows what it will be next week. Yeah. But the disasters in the region are the direct result of the Americans and their allies, which is essentially the most repressive governments in the region, working together to train, arm, and finance these people.
Wow. Holy cow. That is just obviously something that we never hear on mainstream media, but it's so incredibly important because this is just a continuation of intelligence agencies changing names with the same operation, overthrowing governments that they don't like. You have a book out detailing a lot of this information. Can you tell us more about this?
Sure. After the last attempt at my getting information on why I was fired by the State Department, the first one had been shut down in about 1992 as a threat to national security by Judge Harold H. Green. The second one I started about 3 or 4 years ago. State dragged its feet for 2 years and then insisted I give them the names of all the 45,000 people I had interviewed or looked at applications for visas, and said, well, gee, we shredded all of these. And I said, no, you didn't, because when I was in Jeddah, I had visa applications in the files going back 5, 10, 15 years, and I said to my staff, we've got to start getting rid of this stuff. The regulations say we're supposed to shred them every year, and we have a whole file room with 4 and 5 drawer cabinets bulging to overflowing with these things. And they said, Mike, what do you want us to do? Shred these things in the file cabinet or deal with the 200 people a day who are applying for visas, who need to be interviewed, pay their fees, and have their names sent to Washington to be checked against the computer in the State Department for being axe murderers or terrorists or whatever they were. Yeah. So I said, all right, forget the shredding. We can go ahead and we'll do our job. But State insisted they all had shredded the visas. And then I said, fine, I want the name of the guy who did it, I want his rank, and I want the date. And they could never do that.
Wow. Holy cow. Incredible. What is the title of your book, and where can people get it?
Okay, it's Visas for Al-Qaeda, CIA Handouts to Rule the World, and Insider's View. It's available on Amazon, both as a print book and as an ebook, and you can get it from Barnes & Noble's online catalog as well. www.michaelspringmann, SPRINGMANN.com. It has 3 excellent reviews by Wayne Madsen, Andrew Craig, and by the Canadian journalist Barry Zwicker.
Michael Springmann, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being a whistleblower, having the heart and dedication to speak out sincerely. Check out the book. Fascinating information that you won't get anywhere else.
And this is an absolute crime that this government has not produced a single word of explanation except for Robert Gibbs' shameful blaming of Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki's death on his lineage.
C was manipulating code in order to wire money and do money laundering for terrorists and criminals and gangs.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.